They don't. But this is a struggle between corporate profiteers, poisoners, toxin manufacturers, and the citizens whose duty is to protect the planet, Mother Earth. Hello? Okay, this is sacred ground. The people who walked here before us treated it as sacred ground, and we treat it as sacred ground.
We have also extended the public comment period, so a new notice has been submitted and should be published in the Environmental Monitor, I believe, tomorrow, which indicates that the close of the public comment period will be March 30th at 5 p.m. Specifically states March 30th, 5 p.m. as when all comments are due to the department as it relates to this Cape and Islands VMP. So,
if MDAR says, hey, you're right, we're not going to spray, so Eversource will take them to court. That would be nice for us. It would be a nice delay. But when Eversource says to them, these people haven't proved anything, this is arbitrary and capricious on their part, they're going to win. So unless we can come up with evidence of harm, the bees that are dying, the bees that don't appear on your property, unless there is factual evidence of the connection between the herbicides that are sprayed there and those dead bees, it's not satisfactory. And that's it.
Good morning. Thank you, MDAR, for allowing a hearing on behalf of the public to share their greatest points of views of why the vegetation management plan for 2018 to 2022 should not be allowed because it lists the use of herbicides. I'm Laura Kelly of Northeastham, president of POCCA Cape Cod. That's POCCA. CapeCod.org, a nonprofit created to educate about the hazards of what is legal and allowed by federal and state agencies today that are not so safe for us in the long run, and what we can do to lessen our own impact above the water we use every day. I realize you as a state MDAR are looking for scientific facts to base your changes in the VMP, the Vegetation Management Plan written by Eversource, that MDAR is to approve. So I wanted to give you one here today about our hydrology here on Cape Cod. So referring to this map that was actually created by USGS and refers to Mass GIS for the, I call it underground, what's going on underneath our surface level, right? There's lenses. There are 6 lenses. 5 of them are drinkable. Provincetown lens is not drinkable. That's the Pilgrim lens, it's called. Provincetown gets their actual drinkable water through Truro, which Truro is on the list for vegetation management for the next 5 years by Eversource. So if you can look at these the pink line are the rights of ways. Along the rights of ways, the depths to drinkable water are less than 50 feet. In their VMP plan, they are, I want to say thank you, are protecting our wells. No spray is allowed by herbicides 50 feet within a drinkable private well, 100 feet for a public well. But along the rights-of-way power lines, you can see all through Truro, into Eastham, down through Orleans, even in Brewster, it gets a little bit deeper to 40 feet. There is, I propose this as a question, is Eversource violating their own written regulations? They're not allowed to spray within 50 feet of a well, yet the lens is less than 50 feet deep. Water comes from lenses. So this is where I really want to see the VMP written for the ecology of Cape Cod. So we need to remember that gravity is vertical, not horizontal, right? And I want to say thank you for writing regulations that are 50 feet If we could also have it 50 feet below us, then you can't spray on power lines except in some places in Sandwich, where you can see the depth of drinkable water is just over 50 feet here, according to the Mass GIS map. I'll be glad to send you this map electronically. The other thing to think about that Charles touched base on is our sandy soils. Permeation through according to the Barnstable County Soil Survey Document Book of 1993, a liquid travels 22 inches an hour in our sandy soil here. This is a study by the U.S. Department of Agricultural Soil Conservation Service. So these are documents that are, you know, it's in writing that these things are happening. So if it's 22 inches an hour and it's less than, you know, it's more on average 20 feet, but it's less than 50 feet. I mean, we've got to put these equations together and realize what's going on our rights of ways. It was handed to me this summer by MDAR that in 2013, Eversource used 2,065 gallons of herbicides on rights of ways on Cape Cod. In 2014, Eversource used 2,103 gallons of herbicides on Cape Cod. They sprayed the last 5 years. That was the last VMP plan for 5 years. If they did around 2,000 gallons each year for the last 5 years, is that around 10,000 gallons that Eversource applied on Cape Cod? This is what we're trying to prevent from happening again. This is the next VMP for the next 5 years. We've got to do what we can when it's a situation that they can use something else. So Eversource did go through and do a mass clear cutting from 150 to 200 feet. And I thought, why are they doing this? Until this year where they put up the poles that are so tall. It makes sense now. But for years I was like, why does it have to go 200 feet? So they're not talking to the town's departments what's going on the power lines. They're just going forward and doing things, announced to abutters as well as town departments. So that is a request that I have, is to please connect with at least town departments. Let them know what you're going to do before you're going to do it, why you're doing it. You know, why did you need to go to 200 feet? Well, because in 3 years we are going to put poles up that are 200 feet tall. Okay, thank you. You know, let the town's departments know what's going on out here on the power lines. Eversource is the #1 largest user of herbicides on Cape sandy soil. Cumulatively, homeowners and businesses use more. We know this. So let this be a wake-up call for everyone who lives here and resides here to shift our ways. You know, we're in this together. No one is exempt from the impact of our drinkable water here on Cape Cod. Each one of us does matter. So one last thing I wanted to bring up is that MDAR is asking for us to show them harm. That's why we're here. We need strong documents stating why we as a person are harmed directly connected to Eversource's spraying, or why are our wells harmed or contaminated. These to me are impossible questions to be answered. Does that mean our state, MDAR, is waiting for us to be harmed before they're going to change the regulations? We're asking our boards of selectmen in the past 3 years. I've got 21 towns. That's thanks to the POCCA team efforts to go out and speak to the boards of selectmen to write documents against the vegetation management plan and the YOP, the yearly operational plans from happening. 21 towns have written against this. They continue to allow this. We're in another situation where MDAR says, well, the selectmen, we want to hear from the boards of health now because they have more standing. Regardless, these are our boards. What are boards set up for? Boards are set up to protect their residents, right? So regardless of whatever board you want to hear from, and you're going to hear from water boards and you're going to hear from health boards this time around, per your request. But my point is, it doesn't matter what board it is, boards are set up to protect us, you know? So we really want the state to not look at the EPA standards anymore. The EPA allows herbicide use. It is legal. This is not good enough for the hydrology of Cape Cod. That's less than 50 feet to our drinkable water throughout Cape Cod and most parts. We've got to do the right thing for our visitors and for everybody that lives and eats and drinks here. You guys have did such a great clearing. In the past, you've sprayed 10,000 gallons already, potentially. Why can't you go back to hand pruning selectively? All the big work is done. There is no more big work to do. It's little work. It can be done by hand prune, selective, only the plants. You're gonna need to maintain no matter what, because seeds are always gonna happen. The wind is always gonna blow. You're always gonna have to maintain. Are you always gonna maintain with herbicides? We asked you to not.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming down. My name is Judith Underwood. I'm a resident of Harwich. I'm the president of the Blue Institute at Cape Cod, and very recently I've been appointed to be the interim water commissioner in Harwich, and I'm not here as an official of that because it's very new, just a couple weeks. But I am here as the founder and president of the Blue Institute at Cape Cod. We are a global hub for clean water education, research, and innovation. We have about 70 universities across the US and Canada that are going to be sending students here. And we've got about 1,500 graduate students from around the world that are going to be coming here and doing externships. Clean water is very near and dear to my heart. I've worked for a number of years in technology transfer. I've taught at the college level and the K through 12 level. In earlier years, pre-children, I did technology transfer work at the United Nations and the Third World Academy of Sciences in Trieste, Italy. And I'm an early adopter of solar technology on brownfields, so I'm very familiar with brownfields. I'm really disturbed that I have to be here today to speak about this, because I really thought that the state had heard what Cape Codders had to say at all levels, from our scientists, from our politicians, and especially from our residents. This is not new, but it is something that I teach in my classes when we talk about the cautionary principle. And in this case, it's very hard for me to explain to students why the onus is on the citizens to prove to you as the independent body why these chemicals that Eversource is using are potentially going to hurt us. I think it really should be the other way around. They're not disclosing what they are, and in the public policy realm, and as somebody that's representing people that are drinking our water every day, this poses a huge problem of perception. And for scientists understand what perception means when they're trying to convince the general public of something. But here, you're asking the general public to convince Eversource that this is not an issue. And on the contrary, for me, this is really an economics issue. Eversource is a public utility, and very often that word public gets taken out of the equation, and it needs to come back into the equation. Yes, Eversource does have stockholders. We understand that. And they have to pay their stockholders dividends, but at what cost? You know, once we lose our single source aquifer, there's no going back. And one of the reasons why we've located the Blue Institute here on Cape Cod is because of that unique aquasource, that unique aquifer. It's very rare throughout the entire globe to have a place like Cape Cod with that single source aquifer. We have fresh water and we have marine water so close. And for the last 6 years now, I've been serving on the Cape Cod Regional Wastewater Task Force, where we've been, it's made up of stakeholders, and it's through the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce, and it's scientists it's elected officials, it's business people, it's the whole gamut, and educators. And I've learned more about nutrient pollution, right? And so when I teach to students about the Clean Water Act, one of the issues with the Clean Water Act is single source pollution, right? And one of the issues here on Cape Cod, when we look at nitrogen pollution, is you can't go back and point out to which household exactly is putting that pollutant in the water. You can do that when you're dealing with rivers and you're dealing with pipes coming out of factories, right? You can do that in an urban setting. You can't do that in a rural setting. Unless you're going to have channels and channels and channels of wells in the ground for testing, how are you going to control what Eversource is doing? From a scientific perspective, it's a very difficult task. And so that's why I think that onus on what those chemicals could do really needs to first be proven by Eversource that they're safe. And they haven't done that as far as I've seen. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. But from a scientific perspective, it's lacking. It's weak. It gives bad perception. And in an era where our water infrastructure is old and needs to be fixed as it is, this is just adding on to our water pollution problems. So, thank you very much.
That this is not a sustainable means of managing the vegetation under the power lines, because initially when I was fighting this battle, there were 5 herbicides. Now, I was shocked when I went to the meeting in Sandwich to speak, that now there are 9 herbicides. We know that glyphosate kills off soil biodiversity. There are scientists, Dr. Maywan Ho and Dr. Eva Sirinathsinghi, published a book that glyphosate accumulates in the plant's tissue, moves into its roots, and is released into the soil. It increases the virulence of soil-borne disease organisms, and it's toxic to normal biological control and other beneficial organisms in the soil. So not only are they running the risk of contaminating the water supply, at a minimum, they're killing our soil diversity in the process. And when I was at a Cape Cod Commission meeting, and they talk about the restrictions between spraying between open water and drift, I mean, just look at this map. Look at all the open water, and look at where their power lines are. Do you really need a rocket scientist to explain this? It's baffling to me. And in Cape Cod's commission's own little handout that they went when I went there one day for a meeting, give me a moment. Oh, I lost it. Oh, here it is. Only rain down the drain, protect Cape Cod water. When it rains, it drains. Use fertilizers sparingly and avoid pesticides. What's it going to take, people? You know, now in addition to the 9 herbicides that they're going to spray, I guess because we brought up the argument of drift conditions, they decided, oh, well, we can solve that problem. We'll add more chemicals that are drift retardants to avoid the possibility of drift. And at the time, you know, when I did the research, Accord, winds in excess of 5 miles per hour, not supposed to spray. Arsenal, 3 to 10 miles per hour. Escort, 3 to 10 miles per hour. Pyridine, 2 to 10 miles an hour. Quinine, with wind speeds of less than 5 miles per hour. And we aren't even informed of what those chemical cocktails, what those mixtures are going to be, and what those wind conditions are.
That part of the reason for the regulations is so that state agencies don't work and act in arbitrary and capricious manners. On the other hand, I also understand that state agencies have a certain amount of discretion in the interpretation and administration of the regulations. For the record, I agree with all the people here who are opposed to this plan, and I would urge you to listen to the people. deny the plan that has been proposed by Eversource and direct them to come up with a plan that uses alternate and safe methods to protect our drinking water.
Our specific concerns about the list of approved herbicides that are on the MDAR list that Eversource is proposing to use. We strongly believe that there are much better management practices to use on Cape Cod because of our unique situation, our unique soils, the fact that we have a sole source aquifer that's our only water supply, drinking water supply, that feeds our ponds, that feeds our streams, and goes into our estuaries around the Cape.
Unanimously on multiple occasions, the most recent being February 20th, 2018, to oppose the use of herbicides by Eversource, formerly NSTAR, for vegetation management along its rights-of-way on Cape Cod. This opposition is based in many respects on the unknown impacts of herbicides on the Cape's sole source aquifer from which its residents and visitors derive their drinking water. The public health and environmental concerns that led to previous board votes in opposition to herbicide use have not changed. In fact, a recent report from the World Health Organization raised concern with one of the compounds intended to be used as part of the herbicide program. While there is no known direct evidence of contamination of the public water supply, it is a reasonable supposition that such contamination may occur through inappropriate use. Although Eversource voluntarily entered into a moratorium on herbicide use for several years in response to concerns voiced by Cape communities, that moratorium ended. The utility actively resumed use of herbicides as part of their yearly operational plan and is proposing herbicide use as part of the 5-year Vegetation Management Plan 2018 to 2022 currently under consideration. The proposed 2018 to 2022 VMP contains provisions for application of herbicides along with other forms of vegetation management along various rights-of-way on Cape Cod. These includes right-of-way 303, which runs from the Harwich-Chatham line through the Chatham Town Forest to Muddy Creek. Right-of-way 303 runs through DEP-approved Zone 2s for multiple public water supply wells and is within the town's Water Resource Protection Overlay District. Given the environmental sensitivity of the Cape, evidenced by its designation as a sole source aquifer, and the geologic conditions of an extremely permeable sandy soil and high groundwater, any herbicide use has the potential to impact groundwater, drinking water supplies. Although there is, as yet, no direct evidence of such contamination, waiting for such evidence will mean the groundwater supply is impacted and public health jeopardized. The lack of proactive groundwater monitoring for the materials and their surrogates / breakdown products used by Eversource increases the chances of putting Cape residents and visitors at risk. The board supports the efforts of Eversource to establish appropriate plant communities under its power lines to enhance system reliability and feels strongly that such a goal can be achieved without the use of herbicides. By discontinuing the use of herbicides on Cape Cod, Eversource could become a model for all Cape residents on the use of alternatives for vegetation management. Signed, Corey J. Metters, Chairman, Chatham Board of Selectmen. Thank you.
With depths to water in the range typically of between 20 and 50 feet almost all the way across the Cape, except for up in Sandwich, and significant annual rainfall, as we've seen, inches of rain at a time, these toxins are fairly likely to be entering our groundwater vertically, intact. This is the public health concern for these exposures, that pesticide regulations, and in this case herbicide regulations, are precisely intended to limit. They overlook this route into our groundwater. I believe that the unique hydrology of the Cape, its soil types, its groundwater depth and flow, and its oneness with all surface water bodies, these are all groundwater, calls for additional regulatory relief. At a minimum, soil types and percolation rates, as well as depth to groundwater, should be parameters considered in any required pesticide application, with some strict and science-based limits imposed.
Capillary water in the soil.
So basically, when you spray on the top of the surface, if you don't have the little small particles with their little surfaces to catch basically almost molecule level water, then it's just free to keep on moving down through the soil to the groundwater. I mean, it would be nice if we had clay soils all around. And the other thing is that I'm wondering if the folks who have tested for the safety of these herbicides have done it in permeable soils like Cape Cod, or they did it more for a representative soil for the rest of the United States. I mean, if I
organic farmer, I would certainly be against the use of glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, which is even more toxic when mixed with other herbicides. Glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup herbicide, is a biocide that interferes with cellular metabolism and a toxin. It is one of the 5 herbicides Eversource uses on Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard. Its toxicity is of concern around the world, and it has been banned in many jurisdictions, including the Netherlands, France, Belgium, Russia, Sri Lanka, Malta, Mexico, Argentina, and Colombia. The World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer, the IHRC, recognizes glyphosate as a cause of cancer, especially non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, in humans and in other lab animals. It is
pollution is out. You can't pull it back. If there's an inadvertent release of herbicides into the groundwater, that chemical will migrate out, and you can't really easily get it back.
We started the Brewster Ponds Coalition, whose purpose was to protect our ponds and our aquifer. In Brewster, we have seen our pond quality deteriorate over the last few years, so hence the creation of the Brewster Ponds Coalition. And one of our goals with the Brewster Ponds Coalition is to stop the use of herbicides, pesticides, chemical fertilizers, etc. In other words, we want people to have what's called a Cape Cod lawn. And it would be really helpful if Eversource would join us in our effort to protect our aquifer, set an example, and stop spraying. Help us save our ponds and our aquifer. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Bring this up because not everybody has had this experience. I have had this personal experience of regulations not being followed. So please do not approve this if you're not going to enforce these regulations. They're not even following the regulations. We had 2 guys out there with backpack sprayers. They don't have any protection. They don't have the hazmat type stuff on. I feel bad for those guys. You know they're going to get cancer. They're spraying these 3 chemicals in the right away here. They've got maybe gloves on. They don't have face masks. They don't have head coverings. They're getting it on their clothes. The winds are gusting 20 miles an hour. And there's no enforcement. So for all these reasons, I would say, this has no place on the Cape in sandy soils without enforcement of regulations. And when there are alternative means, my friend lives in Chatham, she had
plowed. Power line rights of way are perfect habitat for this useful and medicinally valuable plant. Applications of herbicides to these plants will cause them to become neurotoxins, thereby leading to a myriad of diseases, cancer, Parkinson's, dysbiosis, etc., but especially diseases of the nervous system. Eversource has been spraying these neurotoxins, and yes, that means poisons to the nervous system, on St. John's wort and other valuable medicinal plants, yarrow, plantain, elderberry, etc. For years, they have been spraying these poisons upon the land of others over which they have a right of way. Thus, with a landowner's permission, any person in need of these botanical medicines can harvest them along these rights of way. If the plants are covered with poison, then the public who harvest these plants are being poisoned by Eversource. Basically, Eversource is poisoning our medicine, causing damage to people's nervous systems, and contributing to the heinous mass murders that we are seeing across this country. Thus, I do
know what your board is going to do about the 50-foot.
I can't speak to what the board is going to do. I believe they actually already weighed in on this, though. I believe this matter was brought to the pesticide board. Pesticide board determines, and I don't want to misspeak, but I think a DEP representative was also at that meeting, but I think it was clarified that the generally accepted environmental interpretation is that it's not a 50-foot vertical. That is not, and the pesticide board actually cleared up to the fact that they actually were participated in writing the regulation. So unless it otherwise specifically says vertical, that's not the practice.
Gravity is vertical.
But that's why there are different setbacks for different areas. That's why you have zone 1, zone 2s. That's why a different agency has determined different areas where
so you're
certain...
saying, I have a well and it's right here, and I'm not going to spray more than 50 feet of that well this way, but guess what? The lens is right there. It's still spraying the same water source. It comes from the same, because the well is drawn, the water draws up the well.
No. As I pointed out earlier, our assessments indicate that these chemicals are not making it to the deeper soil layers and in the groundwater.
But I'm showing you they're 5 feet. We're not even talking 6 feet. And that's just along the power lines. Granted, there are pockets in other places, but this is only for power lines, showing you the depth to our drinkable water along rights of ways. This is a map by the USGS and guided by, of course, Mass GIS. And you're still saying, but then the difference between horizontal and vertical is just what I'm stumped at here. So if you're not gonna disapprove the VMP according to that one situation.
No, I think what we're saying is we have a set of regulations that identify setbacks. My understanding is that there was a specific...
I mentioned I'm a delegate to the Barnstable County Assembly. We have, over the past year, had to face a settlement cost of about $6.5 million to clean up groundwater in the town of Barnstable related to the permitted use of polyfluorinated hydrocarbons. I think what I want to ask you then is, do you have proof that these compounds behave differently in terms of their vertical migration into the soil to contaminate the water table for the well fields of Barnstable Town? Can you show me proof that these herbicides that are going to be used by NSTAR, by Eversource, behave differently than PFAS or PFOA that were used for years there? They clearly got down into the soil, got into the water table, and migrated some distance. It feels to me like it's the same thing. It feels like deja vu all over again. That at some point 5 years from now, we're going to say, wow, there are real problems, and this stuff is everywhere in our water. How do you answer that? You said your tests don't show it, but what am I to make of the fact that I know this happened, they could detect it, it's in the drinking water, people had to stop using their water?
Well,
chemicals in question today to control vegetation under the power lines. However, just because something is legal doesn't mean it's right. I'm thinking of Agent Orange as one good example. At some point, common sense must enter into the decision-making process of what we use in controlling as controlling agents for our vegetation that is acceptable to all the interests and health of those who are affected by it. Unfortunately,
out here on the power lines, Eversource is the #1 largest user of herbicides on Cape Sandy soil. Cumulatively, homeowners and businesses use more. We know this. So let this be a wake-up call for everyone who lives here and resides here to shift our ways. We're in this together. No one is exempt from the impact of our drinkable water here on Cape Cod. Each one of us does matter. So one last thing I wanted to...
Throughout Massachusetts. With great sincerity, Stephen B. Brown. As an old Cape Codder, many generations, and with this tradition of living off the land as fishermen, as gardeners, as hunters, this is our children's inheritance. Please, no more herbicides. Thank you.